Hey everybody, this is Tracy here with another edition of A View from Tracy's Point, and we are back with part two of what we're going to call the mitigation report. And remember, I had told you guys that I thought there was a motion that was filed by Judge Donnelly, and I couldn't find it. So I have since found it, and I'll go ahead and read that to you. And if you haven't already checked out part one of the mitigation report, it is a document that was submitted by Jennifer Bongine regarding sort of an outline to the actual mitigation report, which we are about to get into. And it was sort of a summary. So definitely go ahead and check that out once you finish watching this video, or maybe go and check that out first so you'll have more context to this video and what it is that Judge Donnelly is stating. So Judge Donnelly filed this motion, or I shouldn't say it's a motion, it's actually her memorandum decision and order, where she was trying to get these reports unsealed, because I had previously stated to you guys that everything was being filed under seal, and I thought it was because there was, confidential information that Jennifer Bongine did not want to get out. And remember, the government was insisting that they could go ahead and do their mitigation report or meeting with the mitigation specialist, and that if they thought there were things in the document that could violate his Fifth Amendment right in the Chicago case, they could redact it, and they promised that they wouldn't tell the people in Chicago what the information was, like we actually believed them to do that. So here is Ann Donnelly's response to everything being sealed and her telling them to unseal it. And Jennifer Bongine didn't respond to the initial request, and I believe she addresses that in here. But let's go ahead and jump into this motion. It's from Ann Donnelly, United States District Judge. For the reasons stated below, the defendant is directed to file a public version of the supporting exhibits in his supplemental sentencing submission in accordance with the redactions that the government has proposed. And then she lists the document where the government submitted under seal what they wanted redacted. So the defendant may file his 12-page main sentencing memorandum with the limited redactions that his counsel proposed via email, and that is what the mitigation report part one is all about, is that 12-page main document. So background: on June 13, 2022, the defendant filed a supplemental sentencing submission under seal without explaining why sealing was necessary. The submission includes a 12-page memorandum and 163 pages of exhibits, including 2 mitigation reports. Exhibits A and B, prepared by doctors who opined about the defendant's history and his conduct in this case. In an order dated June 24, 2022, the court directed the parties to file letters by June 26, 2022, addressing whether the defendant's sentencing submission should remain under seal in whole or in part, and directed the defendant to propose redactions to the extent that he sought to file the submission publicly with redactions. In response to the court's order, the government filed a letter proposing redactions of the Exhibit A and B reports. When the defendant did not respond by the deadline, the court directed the defendants to provide the court with a redacted version of his supplemental submission consistent with the government's letter. On June 27, 2022, counsel filed a sealed letter in which she agreed that the 12-page supplemental memorandum could be unsealed without redaction, but urged the court to seal Exhibits A and B in their entirety. Some hours later, counsel emailed the court's chambers with proposed redactions of the supplemental memorandum and of the mitigation reports. Counsel also wrote that she intended to file an additional letter objecting to the public filing of the two reports. Because time is short, the sentencing is on June 29, 2022. The court, through the courtroom deputy, directed the parties to consult about redactions and file those redactions before midnight on June 27, 2022. Instead, defense counsel responded in an email to the courtroom deputy as follows. Defendant has proposed his redactions. If the government seeks additional redactions, that is on their motion. The government filed proposed redactions to the docket, which include the redactions that the government initially proposed, as well as additional redactions that protect the identities and privacy of innocent third parties. The government also identified redactions that the defendant proposed with which the government disagreed. Discussion. To the extent that the defendant is claiming that the reports should remain fully sealed, as he argues in his June 27, 2022 letter, that request is denied. The defendant's sentencing, a proceeding presumed to be open to the public under the First Amendment right of access to judicial proceedings and documents. I know Judge Donna ain't talking about no First Amendment rights to a public proceeding when she done held a whole tribunal, a whole secret tribunal for the whole case, that pretty much, like, we don't know who the jury was. Who was the jury of his peers? And then there was no cameras allowed. Well, no cameras are ever allowed in federal courtrooms. But for the people that were in the viewing rooms, they said that the cameras were situated where you couldn't see who was on the witness stand or who the jurors was or anything. So now all of a sudden she's concerned about access for the public to understand this stuff. Girl. Anyway, child, she quotes some cases. United States versus Huntley, Eastern District of New York, 2013. United States versus Alcantara, Second Circuit, 2005. Is less than 24 hours from now. The supplemental sentencing submissions at issue are paradigmatic judicial documents subject to the right of access under both the First Amendment and the common law. Then she cites some more cases. Sentencing memorandum and their accompanying exhibits generally qualify as judicial documents. Then she cites some more cases. It is well recognized that the public has a strong right to sentencing memoranda under the First Amendment and the common law right to judicial records. Moreover, courts have rejected the argument that sentencing submissions like the defendants are akin to pre-sentence reports, and defendant maintains, and then she quotes some more stuff from some more court cases. Pre-sentence investigation reports, unlike parties' sentencing submissions, are internal court documents that are not subject to a presumption of access under the First Amendment or the common law. The presumptive right for public access is even stronger, whereas here the defendant submitted the reports as part and parcel of his legal arguments for a particular sentence to influence the court's sentencing decision. Then she quotes some more cases. Accordingly, the defendant's sentencing materials are judicial documents to which the common law presumption and the First Amendment right of access attach. Certain kinds of information in this submission can be sealed if specific on the record findings are made demonstrating that closure is essential to preserve higher values and is narrowly tailored to serve that intent. Some more cases. Where possible, limited redactions instead of wholesale sealing of court documents should be considered in order to adequately safeguard First Amendment values. In the context of sentencing proceedings, courts have identified the privacy and safety of innocent third parties the viability of ongoing law enforcement investigations, and the protection of personal medical information under certain circumstances as higher interests that may justify sealing. Then she quotes some more cases. The parties proposed many of the same redactions. The defendant proposed some additional redactions, but did not explain why those redactions were essential to preserve higher values or that they were narrowly tailored to serve that interest. Another case, having reviewed both sets of redactions, I conclude that those redactions that the government proposed serve the interest of protecting the identities of the defendant's victims as well as the privacy of third parties mentioned in the reports. Okay, have they not figured out yet that we know who these damn victims? Oh, Jesus, do they really think we don't know who these people are at this point? But anyway, we're going to play along. Accordingly, by no later than 3 p.m. on June 28, 2022, the defendant is directed to file on the docket unsealed, redacted versions of, and then they have the documents that she wants unsealed that incorporate the government's proposed redactions, and then they give the number, the pages, and all that stuff. The defendant may file his 12-page main sentencing memorandum with the limited redactions that his counsel proposed via email, as the court finds that those redactions comport with the principles discussed herein and thus are justified. And that was from Judge Ann Dunley. Okay, so before I get into the mitigation report, I want y'all to know there were 4 exhibits that were filed, right? So Exhibit C, I am not going to read because it is 163 pages, but it is the resume, okay, of the doctor, I guess the main doctor who performed this mitigation report, Park, Dietz and Associates forensic experts. And it's his curriculum vitae, which is another fancy word for his resume, right? But it's like his professional, not a resume that you would do for your job. It's a resume that includes like your professional experiences and education and certifications. And this man's is 163 pages long. And it shows like his current positions. He is, works for all these practices, president of Parks, Dietz and Associates, and where their different locations are in California, clinical professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences, Neuropsychiatric Institute, David Geffen School of Medicine, University of California, president, Threat Assessment Group, Incorporated, also in California, forensic psychiatry consultant, forensic sciences unit, New York State Police, Albany, New York, 1981, consultant, critical incident response group, behavioral science unit, profiling and behavioral assessment unit, behavioral analysis units, and National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime with the FBI Academy, Quantico, Virginia. Education. This man graduated from Cornell University. John Hopkins University School of Medicine, John Hopkins School of Hygiene and Public Health, John Hopkins University for Sociology. His postgraduate training, assistant resident, Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences, John Hopkins Hospital, resident, Department of Psychiatry, Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania. He has done several fellowships, full-time academic appointments from, dating back to 1975, visiting and adjunct appointments, 1975 through 2016, hospital administrative appointments from 1978 to 1990, institutional committee assignments. I mean, like he has, wow, licensures, Maryland State Board of Medical Examiners, Pennsylvania State Board of Medical Examiners, medical education and license, Massachusetts Board of Registration and Medical Registration, American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology, Virginia State Board Medical License, awards and honors. Oh my God, he has a lot of awards, pages, national public policy activities, editorial boards, professional societies, memberships, offices, and committees. Goes on, pages, research grants. Let's see. One of his grants for violence and mental disorders was for $399,813. Research advisory positions, selected notable cases that are public information. So he has all the court cases that he's worked on. One of them was the attempted assassination of President Reagan. Let's see, consultant to the FBI, National Food Processors Association, consultant to the FBI in another case of unresolved serial homicides, serial B words, R words, and other active investigations. Just a consultant to the CIA, to the state attorney's office in New York. Oh my God, goes on for pages. Cases that he has worked on where he has been called in as a consultant. Pages upon pages upon pages, y'all. I'm still scrolling through all the pages where he has been consulted, where he lists all the cases that he has consulted on. It's got to be like half the document has to be all these cases that he's consulted on. But just to give you guys an idea of all that this man, his credentials. So definitely someone, Judge Donnelly, should take their opinion seriously. And then he has a whole bunch of pages of articles that he's written. Let's see, other lecture sites, places where he's done lectures, threat assessment group, workplace violence prevention courses. So it goes on and on. So the man, or I think it's a man, their name is Park, but they have the credentials, so we can trust what they're saying. They got 163 pages worth of credentials. So let's go over here to, I don't know if I want to do Exhibit A first or Exhibit B. But let's go ahead and do Exhibit A. So Exhibit A is a letter, and it says, and it was written on June 13, 2022, and it's written to Ms. Bonjean, and it says, my colleagues and I have evaluated Mr. Kelly with respect to issues the court may find relevant at the sentencing hearing scheduled for June 29, 2022. We interviewed Mr. Kelly for over 14 hours, located and interviewed 10 collateral witnesses who knew Mr. Kelly during childhood, and reviewed the materials your office provided and a few biographical materials we located. These sources of information are all listed below. Our division of task was that Daniel Martel, PhD, conducted neuropsychological testing, Shante Alexander, EDD, conducted collateral interviews, and Renee Sorrentino, MD, and I interviewed Mr. Kelly together. Mr. Martel's report is focused on the neuropsychological testing. Dr. Sorrentino's report contains a complete history and focuses on Mr. Kelly's sexual and relationship history and psychiatric diagnosis, while this report focuses on adverse childhood experiences, illiteracy, victimization during adulthood, the question of coercive control, the effects of stardom, and positive character traits. Touching briefly on psychiatric diagnosis, I rely on the first-hand observations of collateral witnesses interviewed by Dr. Alexander. Rather than repeat information already known to the court, I focus here on specific information about the history and characteristics of Mr. Kelly identified through our evaluation that may not yet have been brought to the court's attention. Now, guys, remember I read a summary, that 12-page summary from Jennifer Bungine. So you might think that some of this information is repetitive, and this is his actual report to her. And then the letter that I did in part 1 was the summation of what was presented in exhibits A and B. So it goes on to say, sources of information, unless otherwise cited in the body of this report, the biographical and first-person accounts included here are drawn from the interviews of the defendant that I conducted jointly with Dr. Sorrentino. Interviews of defendant, interview of Robert Kelly at MDC Brooklyn by Park Dietz, MD, MPH, PhD, and Renee Sorrentino, MD, on May 24th, 2022, lasted 5 hours and 45 minutes. And then they had another interview with him on May 25th that lasted 6 hours and 40 minutes. And then they did a WebEx interview that on June 1st that lasted 2 hours. So the first two were in person, and then the third interview was a video conference. So forensic evaluation reports, forensics neuropsychological examination report by Daniel A. Martell, PhD, on June 6, 2022. Mitigation report by Renee Sorrentino, MD, from June 13, 2022. Collateral interviews. Interview of Janet Edmonds by Shantae Alexander. So all these interviews and these names were all done by Shantae Alexander. So I'm not going to keep saying by her. So interview of Janet Edmonds was on May 17th. Interview of Keith Calvert was on May 17th. Interview of Gregory Preston was on May 18th. Interview of Angela Belton was on May 19th. Interview of Reginald King was on May 23rd. Interview of Deborah Harris was on May 24th. Interview of Larry Hood was on May 24th. Interview of Carrie Kelly was on May 27th. An interview of Robert Bradley was on May 27th. And then they interviewed Bruce Kelly on May 30th. And then documents, superseding indictment, verdict sheet, Defendant Kelly's memorandum of law in support of his supplemental motion for a new trial, government response to supplemental motion for a new trial, defendant's reply to response to the government's memorandum of law. So they're going through a bunch of records that Jennifer Bungine presented to them. Bureau of Prisons medical records, pre-sentence investigation report by the U.S. Probation Office, Officer Frank Thomas Nicolaidis, Defendant Kelly's objections to the pre-sentence report. And many of those documents, I have done videos on, so you can go back and check those out. Then media that was supplied by Ms. Bungine was these 100 videos y'all said was going to be presented in this case. But we have video exhibit 328A, video exhibit 329A, video exhibit 330A, video exhibit 341A, video exhibit 342A, and video exhibit 343. And then there were some images. There was one image accompanied with each of these. And then Surviving Lies, Season 1, Episode 1, Surviving Lies, Season 1, Episode 2. And then the book, Solar Coaster, The Diary of Me, which was published in 2011. And then their findings, adverse childhood experiences, which I told you guys is going to be abbreviated as ACEs, ACE, have been the focus of countless studies for more than 20 years following the 1998 publication that introduced this approach. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation offers a succinct summary of this research effort. Traumatic childhood events such as abuse, neglect, and witnessing experiences like crime, parental conflict, mental illness, and substance abuse can result in long term negative effects on learning behavior and health, often referred to as adverse childhood experiences. These types of events create dangerous levels of stress that can derail healthy brain development and increase risk for smoking, alcoholism, depression, heart disease, and dozens of other illnesses and unhealthy behaviors throughout life. Much of the research on ACEs relies on self-reported or parent-reported responses to questionnaires such as the Adverse Childhood Experience Questionnaire for adults. To ensure that information gathered for present purposes was more reliable than mere self-report, we sought corroboration or refuted evidence through collateral witnesses as indicated below. And then they cite June 4th, a search of Google Scholar for the phrase adverse childhood experiences returned 1,770,000 results. 2. Relationship of childhood abuse and household dysfunction to many of the leading causes of death in adults, the adverse experiences study, and then they list some of the returns that came back from doing that search. So over 1.7 million searches have been done on this topic that they're covering. So the particular questions asked in ACEs research are not uniform from study to study, as one report notes. There is no single agreed upon list of experiences that encompass what we refer to as adverse childhood experiences. The original ACEs study asked a large sample of adults about 7 childhood experiences: psychological, physical, and sexual abuse, as well as exposure in the home to substance abuse, mental illness, and suicide, incarceration, or violence. Since then, the list of ACEs used in one or more studies has been expanded to include physical and emotional neglect, parental separation and divorce, exposure to violence outside of the home, living in unsafe neighborhoods, homelessness, bullying, discrimination based on race or ethnicity, and experience of income insecurity. During the interview with Mr. Kelly, I asked him the 10 questions in the Adverse Childhood Experience Questionnaire for adults, one of the commonly used versions of this inventory, and he endorsed these 6 of the 10 experiences. Did you feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, or had no one to protect or take care of you? Did you lose a parent through divorce, abandonment, death, or other reason? Did you live with anyone who had a problem with drinking or using drugs, including prescription drugs? Did your parents or adults in your home ever hit, punch, beat, or threaten to harm each other? Did a parent or adult in your home ever swear at you, insult you, or put you down? Did you experience unwanted sexual contact, such as fondling, oral, anal, vaginal intercourse, or penetration? In addition, he described several ACEs that were not included in that questionnaire that have been included in other studies, namely bullying, exposure to violent crime, and witnessing death. Below, I synopsize what Mr. Kelly and collateral witnesses said about each of these, but before turning to the evidence, it is important to understand the significance of anyone having actually been exposed to so many adverse childhood experiences. Sykes and Murphy, 2018, and it sounds like this is a book. Okay, yeah, Sykes v. and Murphy D., The Prevalence of Adverse Childhood Experiences Nationally by State and by Race or Ethnicity, Child Trends, February 12, 2018. It summarized a large body of research conducted, over the course of 20 years. ACEs have been linked to numerous negative outcomes in adulthood, and research has increasingly identified effects of ACEs in childhood. Negative outcomes associated with ACEs include some of society's most intractable and, in many cases, growing health issues: alcoholism, drug abuse, depression, suicide, poor physical health, and obesity. There is also some evidence that ACEs are linked to lower educational attainment, unemployment, and poverty. In childhood, children who have experienced ACEs are more likely to struggle in school and have emotional and behavioral challenges. Nevertheless, not all children have experienced one of these adverse events, or even more than one are negatively affected. Much depends on the context in which they occur, particularly the context of positive relationships. Research has found that the risk for negative outcome increases with the number of ACEs. In other words, children who have experienced multiple ACEs are substantially more likely to be negatively affected than children who have experienced only one. A seminal study published in the late 1990s by Felitti and their colleagues that first coined the term adverse children experiences found that adults who have experienced 4 or more ACEs had a particularly high risk for negative physical and mental health outcomes, including some of the leading causes of death in the United States. Subsequent studies have identified lower thresholds ranging from 1 to 3 ACEs as the tipping point at which risk increases greatly. There are likely to be multiple factors that account for individual variation in response to adversity, including genetic predispositions and other biological characteristics, as well as contextual factors such as supportive adult relationships. Citations omitted. The prevalence of ACEs has been explored in large samples, the largest and most diverse of which at the time of publication in 2018 reflected self-report responses in a nationally representative telephone survey of non-institutionalized adults in 23 states that included an 11-item ACE assessment in their annual behavioral risk. Respondents included in the sample, 15.8% reported 4 or more ACEs. Participants who identified as Black reported significantly higher ACE exposures than those who identified as white. Many of Mr. Kelly's problems are now known to be adverse outcomes associated with cumulative ACEs, including, but not limited to, below average academic and literacy skills by kindergarten age, lower social engagement, learning behavior problems, not completing high school, STDs, having 50 or more sexual partners, anxiety, panic disorder, and criminal conviction. Separately, there is now substantial evidence that a history of being abused as a child is associated with subsequent conviction for sex offenses. Evidence available as of this writing regarding the ACEs endorsed or reported by Mr. Kelly is reviewed below. And guys, throughout this document, there are things that are redacted, and I'll just let you know that there's a large portion or small portion that's been redacted. And so at the bottom of this page, they have a lot of resources from information that they gathered from their search of those 1.7 million returns that they got. And so we're not going to go through all those documents or all these articles and books and that type of thing. Mr. Kelly said, "We were very poor. There was no money except enough to pay for rent and food. They bought their clothes at the rummage store. He was often hungry and did not have enough to eat. His mother owed money to a lot of landlords, and when she couldn't pay, they moved, which is why they moved so often and why he attended at least 4 different schools prior to high school." So there is a redaction of about 2 sentences. And then it picks up and says, Angela Belton, who as a teenager was Bruce Kelly's girlfriend, knew Robert as a young boy and confirmed that he came from very humble beginnings and very much so in poverty. Then he talks about parental loss. Mr. Kelly was abandoned by his father, whom he had never met. Although he had heard rumors, he does not know his father's identity. His mother told him that his father left when she refused to have an abortion. His siblings each had different fathers who dropped off Christmas and birthday gifts for them, but his father never did. Can y'all imagine a child knowing that their father left because he wanted them to be aborted? Like, oh my God. Carrie Kelly didn't believe that Robert had ever met his father. Bruce Kelly confirmed that Robert's father never visited him and said that Robert saw Lucius as more of a father figure than the other Kelly children did, as evidenced by Robert giving Lucius a Black American Express card. About 6 months before his arrest, 2 women claiming to be his sisters asked him to take a blood test. Now, child, Adam Heifers done got up in the... Why is them fake sisters up in this report? So there they done redacted. So they got substance abuse in the home. And so there's a paragraph redacted. And then it says Bruce Kelly reported. And then that's redacted. Then they talk about the dates that they interviewed people. Witnessing violence in the home. All of that is redacted. And then it picks up on another page, so a whole page was redacted, guys. Deborah Harris, who had known Robert since grammar school when she was 12 and he 14, recalled that Joanne Kelly was strict with the boys and made them abide by her rules, acknowledging that she was more of a troublemaker and got Robert in trouble for staying out too late on at least one occasion. Disparagement in the home. Mr. Kelly responded affirmatively to the question, did a parent or adult in your home ever swear at you, insult you, or put you down? The interview was terminated by correctional staff before he could provide examples of these. I don't consider this a substantiated. So how they end up interrupting the interview and not letting the people ask him pertinent questions that they had? Okay, so sexual abuse. Mr. Kelly described multiple sources of sexual abuse and premature sexualization, the latter of which, standing alone, is not necessarily an adverse childhood experience. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 paragraphs covering a page and a half is all redacted. Bullying. And when he says a standalone event, so he was saying that if that was the only thing that negatively impacted his life, then that wouldn't be substantial. But the fact that there are multiple things combined, then it makes the entirety of all the things combined substantial. Bullying. Mr. Kelly reported having been teased and bullied throughout grammar school whenever he was asked to read, do math, or take a test. He was embarrassed to be seen as a dummy who can't read or write. He was also teased and bullied for having a big butt, with other children saying he had a girl booty. Lord have mercy. Grandma booty or stripper booty. During the interview, he hesitated and looked down in shame as he recalled these remarks. Bruce Kelly also reported that Robert was teased by a lot of kids in grammar school because of his inability to read and write, and described him as so shy that he would turn his back to the audience when asked to sing for guests at their home. Deborah Harris said Robert was teased in school because of his clothing and his inability to read. So they have 4 notes at the bottom of the page. They redacted one of the first one, and then the other 3 they tell you that they gathered information from Bruce Kelly and Deborah Harris. So where they're notating quotations and that type of thing. So I'm assuming that the part the note number 31 that's redacted was for those page and a half that was redacted, and they're not letting us know who told them that information. So Larry Hood recalled Robert being teased in childhood because of his clothing, neighborhood crime. He witnessed and experienced gang violence in childhood while playing football in the vacant lot between his home and Mr. Henry's. He was robbed by a gang who beat another boy, the first to run, with broken bottles. While riding his bicycle to Walgreens with his brother Bruce, gang members wanted to borrow their bikes, so they rode away so fast I think they meant pedal broke. They got off the bikes and had to fight. He was injured in the fight. Bruce swung his camera at one of the attackers who ran off. Reginald King, a childhood friend, said, "We were around hustlers, dope dealers, drug dealers, pimps, players, and all that." When Mr. Kelly was 14, he was shot in the arm with a .22 round while riding his bike down the block. He did not recall being shot, but rather hearing a shot, feeling dizzy, and awakening in a hospital. After being shot, he had nightmares about dying, but not about the shooting. His bicycle was taken away after this, and when he became famous, he bought about 50 bicycles. Yes, 50 bicycles, y'all. While living at 63rd in Michigan, his mother asked him to go to the store. He always ran to the store, but on one occasion, boys who thought he was running up on them kicked him repeatedly. Witnessing death. Mr. Kelly witnessed the drowning death of his first girlfriend, Lulu, they got that redacted, when they were both 8 or 9 years old and living in Chicago Heights. They and other children snuck around a fence and threw rocks in the river. Lulu got too close to the water and another boy pushed her. She fell in the water and neither she nor the other children knew how to swim, so they did not jump in to save her. He recalled, "I was screaming. Her drowned body was recovered from Lake Michigan, into which the river flows. Lulu's mother, Miss," and then they have her name redacted, "was Robert's mother's best friend. The whole neighborhood knew of her puppy love and all mourned her. For years he suffered nightmares about this, dreaming of Lulu screaming in the current and couldn't get it out of his waking thoughts. He never went to the river again and avoided going near the water when his stepfather fished at the lake." He added, "I can't swim to this day." He became concerned that his children learned to swim. And then at the bottom of that previous page, they have an interview with Larry Hood, interview of Reginald King. This is identified as Thorn Creek in the chapter on Lulu's death in his autobiography, but maps of Chicago Heights indicate that it is Thorn Creek that flows through the neighborhood, and then photographs of Thorn Creek depict resembling a river in width. Kelly R. with Ritz D. Soul Coaster, The Diary of Me, New York Smiley Books. And then they talk about pages 11 through 13 is where he talks about Lulu. So Bruce Kelly confirmed that Robert must have been 8 years old when Lulu drowned and that the family was living in Chicago Heights at the time. And he said that it was a really traumatic event. He described her family as good friends of his family. Carrie Kelly recalled that when Lulu drowned, Robert was heartbroken. "I could see the difference in him." He said Robert became even more quiet and he'd catch him staring off into space. So then it picks up and says, Bruce Kelly confirmed that Robert must have been 8 years old. Oh, I think I already read that. I had to step away for a second. Let's see. Well, I'll read it again because it seemed like I thought I ended with the prior sentence. But Bruce Kelly confirmed that Robert must have been 8 years old when Lulu drowned and that the family was living in Chicago Heights at the time. And he said that it was a really traumatic event. He described her family as good friends of his family. Carrie Kelly recalled that when Lulu drowned, Robert was heartbroken. "I could see him See the difference in him, he said. Robert became even more quiet and he'd catch him staring off in space. Then illiteracy. Mr. Kelly reported that he does not know how to read, write, or send email. As a child, when he first tried to learn to read, the first word that came to mind was hell. He recalled that when he attended a school in Oak Lawn at age 8 or earlier, he sat on the school's porch instead of playing with the other children, wondering what was wrong with him. The teacher had asked the children to take turns reading aloud, which caused him fear. He said he was very scared and remains so to this day when asked to read aloud. He pretended he couldn't see, felt like dying, wanted to be home with his mother, and heard other children snickering at him. As a child, he envied those who could read, write, socialize, and speak to people comfortably. He feared that if people looked in his eyes, they could see he couldn't read. I always get that if people could see my eyes or hear me read, they'd know I was the dummy that I was called at all the time. This was among the reasons he began to wear dark glasses at school and when performing. He feared someone would bring out a book or talk about numbers or something he couldn't discuss. He said his grades throughout law school was mostly F's except law school. Throughout school were mostly F's except for gym class. He was held back more than once, and at Lewisworth in Hyde Park, he was the only student in the class with a beard. In high school, he said, I was way out of my league and I knew it. Because he couldn't read, write, or do math, he was silent in class, always putting his head down and acting sleepy. His mind drifted all the time and he heard music and got a headache, imagining himself somewhere else and trying to forget the things I was terrible at. And then they quote that they interviewed Bruce and Carrie for some of the information that I read on this page. Then it goes on to say, Dr. Martell observed, he also found some of the testing anxiety provoking as it reminded him of school and he would become easily overwhelmed. During these times, he was observed to yawn, fidget, wipe his eyes, and become distracted by activity outside the examination room. So he was exhibiting anxiety while they were interviewing him. So on formal testing of academic skills, Dr. Martell found that Mr. Kelly had significant impairments in all areas of academic functioning, placing him in the bottom first to third percentiles and at the early elementary school level, first to third grade overall. Dr. Martell's testing indicated that Mr. Kelly's cognitive abilities are not evenly developed, such that his full-scale IQ, which fell in the borderline range of 79, does not adequately reflect his overall level of intellectual ability, which is more likely in the low average range, in part due to his lack of school learning. Carrie Kelly said Robert couldn't really grasp a hold to, like reading, writing, understanding. That's how we knew that it's a gift that's embedded in him from God. Because if he can't read and write, how can he write songs the way that he do? But yeah, I think that kind of disturbs him, and that kind of bothered him, and that made him feel like he wasn't normal. Childhood friend Reginald King said that Robert struggled with schoolwork, particularly reading. Childhood friend Larry Hood said he probably had like a learning disability. He wasn't the sharpest tool in the drawer. As far as he wasn't able to read and write and stuff like that. Anytime he came in tune with something that involves reading stuff, I had to do it for him. Oh, he struggled with his education. Janet Edmonds, a friend since childhood, recalled that as an adult, Mr. Kelly sometimes had her read business letters to him. Keith Calvert, a friend since childhood, said that everyone knew that Robert couldn't read and that during an after-school program they both attended, when others were asked to read aloud, Robert would be asked to sing instead. Mr. Kelly was so ashamed about his inability to read the teleprompter that he never told anyone of this when accepting Grammy Awards despite his great fear. And then they, once again, notating in the notes section who was interviewed on this page. And these are citations, I shouldn't say noting, but they're citing who is talking and where the information came from. And so they have Carrie, Reginald, Larry, Janet, Keith, and then a neuropsychological examination report by Daniel Martel, and what pages of the report was included there. So his subjective experience of trying to read is that he gets a headache and watery eyes, feels tired and sleepy, yawns, and hears loud, cluttered music, which he described as hearing multiple songs at once, as if from a radio, which is confusing. Other triggers to hearing this radio in his mind are trying to learn to spell and trying to learn to play chess. All of these endeavors make him anxious and trigger the radio. As soon as the pressure is removed, he feels better and the radio goes away. As best I could elicit from him, the pressure he experiences is being asked to read aloud in class or interacting with someone who is trying to teach him reading, spelling, chess, or other feared tasks. The radio in the head phenomenon is also central to his composition of music. He said, "When a song comes to me, it's on the radio in my head. I hear the bass line. It's complete. It's like I'm cheating on a test." Throughout his youth, various people tried to help him learn to read, including his mother, his sister, his brother Bruce, his stepfather Lucius, and his girlfriend Lanice when he was about 17. To his knowledge, he never received any special education services. He once saw a video of a woman who can jog but not walk, and this resonated with him because he was able to talk and sing but not read or write. Mr. Kelly eventually created a form of notation that used letters from the alphabet and idiosyncratic spelling so that he could create reminders for himself, and he brought notepads to the first day of our examination. At one point, while singing a song he had written, he turned blank pages as he sang, as though reading the lyrics, and used a pair of clear lens glasses as a prop. Taking them on and off, he commented that he'd always paid attention to how professors and others took their glasses on and off and took notes the way Dr. Sorrentino and I were doing, and he wanted to achieve that look. And you guys know I've seen him do that in interviews, because it always drove me crazy that he wore those shades all the time. And then I started to notice that in some interviews, he would take the shades off, talk a little bit, then he would put the shades back on. And I would always be like, okay, I know some people say, oh, that's a nervous condition, like when somebody is about to lie to you, how they'll divert their eyes, look up in the sky, look down, pick something off their shirt, and that's a sign that they're lying. And I just always wondered what was the significance of him putting the glasses on and off. And so here we find out that he feels that it made him seem more intelligent than he was when he's taking the glasses on and off, and he's like mimicking a professor. So victimization in adulthood. From the time he had his first break in the music industry, Mr. Kelly was financially exploited. He said that at the time, some sort of audit, he was told his net worth was $900 million. Early in Mr. Kelly's career, he won $100,000 at a talent show with Natalie Cole, but he said, and then it's redacted, stole the money and gave him none of it. Child, probably Demetrius Smith. And then somebody introduced him to his lawyer, Darryl Porter, who introduced him to his, and then all that's redacted. And then there's a note at the bottom that says the spellings of Lucius and Lanice used in this report are based on the usage in the book Solar Coaster. So they weren't sure if they were spelling it correctly. So then it says Barry Hankerson, Aaliyah's uncle, became his manager, and was paid 20% of Mr. Kelly's income while charging $100,000 for every meeting. So you getting 20% of the man's money, and then you charging him $100 to go to a meeting. Do y'all know how many meetings they had to have had? And this man is charging him $100,000 per meeting. This is crazy. So then the next paragraph is redacted. And then it says he replaced Hankerson as his manager with, and I'm thinking probably Darren McDavid. Mr. Kelly asked, and then it's redacted, to invest his money in a recording studio, a cigar bar, and a keyboard branded with his name, but none of this occurred. And then this person instead rented a studio and started Marcadito, a popular restaurant in Chicago. So we know that that's Darren McDavid who did that. And then the rest of the paragraph is redacted. And then it says, Mr. Kelly said that he had been kidnapped in Nigeria. Whoa. And then a whole bunch is redacted. So maybe that's going to come out in the Northern District of Illinois case. It's probably some of the shenanigans that Darren McDavid then stole money from him. So as it happened, Mr. Kelly had been with a woman the night before whose uncle was a chief, and after the chief spoke to the woman, Mr. Kelly was given a choice to fly home on a private jet with his girlfriends and auntie, or wait for whoever this person was to arrive. Mr. Kelly was prepared to wait, but the chief said the news that R. Kelly was kidnapped was too big, so he had to go home. Bruce Kelly also described in this redacted financial exploitation, but we know at this point they're talking about Darren McDavid. And then there's a quote that says, for years I've told Robert about his trusting nature. He trusts people too much. He wants to be accepted. He wants to be accepted. He wants to be liked, but I used to tell him, because there's a difference between, trusting people and liking people and just being a fool with the people, and then it's a redaction. After, a year or so, I just started to notice things. I started to get really, bad feelings about this person. I suspected that he was taking Robert's money. So we're just going to say Daryl, child, because they already told us that this is coming from an interview with Bruce. So we just going to go with Daryl in this part. I suspected that he was taking Robert's money. So I told Robert, you need to sometimes have your accountant audited. So he felt like, him and Daryl was friends. Man, Daryl, cool. I don't need to, ain't got nothing to do with friendship. You need to have that guy audited. So he's saying what Robert said, which was basically, man, Daryl is cool. I don't need to. End of quote from Robert. And then Bruce is picking back up, I'm assuming. Ain't got nothing to do with friendship. You need to have that guy audited and make sure he's doing with your money what he's supposed to be doing. But he never did. Robert got tired of Daryl coming to and then it was inaudible, whatever he said, when we were playing basketball, telling him he needs to sign checks. Robert got tired of that. So he was like, why can't he sign the checks? Well, I don't have power of attorney over your. And then, we need to do that. And I guess that was Robert. And he gave it up, gave power of attorney over his accounts. Now, Robert can't even go to the bank and get money himself from, his own money. He has to go to Daryl to get money. And that's when I believe Daryl, would start running amok. Robert always told him he wants a business. Robert wanted a cigar. He wanted a cigar lounge, and Daryl would never do anything to try to get Robert a cigar lounge. None of this. So then Larry Hood recounted an incident about which he had first-hand knowledge. And then he says, take for instance, when his jewelry got stolen. I was on the Chicago Police Department at the time. So when the detectives reached out to me to help him find the jewelry, I told them where one of the guys lived that was involved with the theft of the jewelry. When they got him and got some of his stuff back, the detectives were dealing with blank blank at the time to get some receipts for the jury and stuff. Blank was funny about producing. I'm thinking Daryl McDavid. We just gonna keep flowing with Daryl. These redactions here. Daryl was funny about producing the receipts to the detectives for the jury and stuff like that. So the detectives came to me and they were like, man, this Daryl McDavid man, there's something ain't right about him. You know, you need to talk to your boy because he don't want to share the information that we need about the jury. You know, he's stealing from your boy. So when I went back to tell Rob about it, Rob, you know, he kind of shunned me off about it, man. He didn't want me to tell him nothing about Daryl. So Bruce said he thought his brother was so trusting because he wanted to be accepted. He wants to be liked and loved by everyone. In school, when kids teased him about reading, that's why he figured if he could become this great singer, then everybody would love him. Aww. And then they quote that the notes at the bottom tell you that those were comments from Bruce and Larry. And then Keith Calvert said, everyone was stealing from him. I mean, they were stealing from him. They were doing whatever they could do to survive themselves. He would throw parties, but the party is not really for him. The party is for everybody else because he had been in the back working and everybody else at the party. And he had come out for a few minutes, but he would be back in the studio, back room and work. You know, so he did it for his friends can have something to do, and they didn't have to pay for nothing, and he paid for everything. So they became people inviting people to the party, you know, and invite people to the party. But then it got to a point where he started having people to show their ID because, you know, you got people coming out with any kind of way, and then you got people sneaking people in. And then he says, even Blank stole from him. Mr. Kelly said that the last time he saw Blank at his house, Bruce showed up and then Blank and stole his car. So something redacted there, child. I don't know what it say. The very last time he saw Blank, Mr. Kelly gave him a Fender bass guitar to keep at the studio and told him that if he learned the songs, he'd pay him $2,000 per week and take him on tour. Instead, Blank relapsed and stole the bass. Well, child, is they talking about is they talking about Rashona Daddy? Wasn't he the guitar player? Oh, yeah, and we know he was on drugs, right? Okay. So I'm thinking they talking about, is it Greg Lamphere? Is that his name? God bless the dead. Rest in peace, man. But I think that's who they talking about here. So 2 months before his arrest, Mr. Kelly went to his bank, Chase, for the first time in his life and discovered he had bad credit. A woman named Rose was kind to him and told him he had multiple accounts but had only $300,000. He took out $10,000 for the first time in his life and his account was frozen about a month later. And we know that $10,000 was homegirl that paid the bond for him. I can't think of her name right now. Valencia, was that her name? Okay, so 2 months before his arrest, I already read that. Okay, Mr. Kelly described multiple examples of false news reports about him, each of which I would consider a form of victimization by the press, particularly the tabloid press, those seeking followers on social media, and those who sell or trade them information, stories, and photographs. In my experience, this is a universal problem for top celebrities, some of whom spend large sums on lawyers, security services, publicists, handlers, fixers, and others to prevent and discourage libelous stories and unauthorized disclosures of information and to discourage dissemination. Mr. Kelly said his first experience with false news reports about him as a celebrity arose from an incident in which he was sitting in a McDonald's parking lot with his publicist. By his account, he was in a $500,000 car when police asked or ordered him to exit the vehicle and broke the door when he did not. He said he went limp and the police handcuffed him to the wall until his lawyer arrived. News outlets reported that the police had pulled him over and ordered him to turn the music down and that he refused and drove off. But he hadn't been pulled over and he did not drive off. Although he wanted to sue the police for how he'd been treated, the matter was resolved when the police department provided a letter of apology. Although he was unsure at the time, even when told of events mentioned in the pre-sentence investigation report, he thought this might have been the incident identified as misdemeanor disorderly conduct occurring at 624 North Clark Street, Chicago, Illinois, on April 6, 1998. And I determined that there is currently a McDonald's restaurant at that location. Since then, the number of transparently false reports has multiplied exponentially. And we can attest to that. And then the notes above basically is saying that Keith Calvert is the person that's providing the information on that page. Mr. Kelly said it made him paranoid, that every time he turned his back, people tried to get information to use to rip him off or sought to obtain information they could sell. He understood that it was in a large measure his inability to read or comprehend arithmetic that made him vulnerable to the predations of those who controlled his business interests and money, and that he had often trusted people undeserving of his trust. Since his arrest, at least one correctional officer had sold confidential information about him. Coercive control. The pre-sentence report adopts the government's description of Mr. Kelly and his employees as comprising an enterprise for purposes of RICO prosecution, a characterization that remains in dispute. When I first read about the underlying behaviors put forth as evidence of the enterprise, my first impression was that what was actually being described was the behavior of one man exhibiting the poorly defined pattern of behaviors known in the intimate partner violence literature as coercive control. In this instance, a man in the unusual situation of being surrounded by enablers. Based on the interviews with Mr. Kelly, I now question whether even this characterization may be grossly distorted. I asked Mr. Kelly about each of the 14 behaviors that could be construed as coercive control of his employees and guests, and report below what he had to say about each. Allegation 1. Okay, before I get into that, they got notes at the bottom. So they reference the pre-sentence investigation report by the U.S. probation officer, and then a Google Maps, a link to where they found in Chicago, where they talked about the McDonald's in Chicago. Then the memorandum of law in support of his supplemental motion for a new trial, and then pre-sentence investigation report again by U.S. probation officer Frank Thomas Nicolaitis. And remember, when I'm telling you these notes, these are things that are cited in the documents, like where they're getting the information from. So allegation 1, requiring that employees obtain approval before carrying out mundane tasks such as allowing people to go to the bathroom. Mr. Kelly dismissed this allegation as untrue, despite some kernels of truth that he acknowledged, including his effort to keep order at his studio, particularly the studio in his home, rather than having people wander everywhere and a problem arising when people were left behind during tour bus stops, described further below. He acknowledged that as a boss, he found he needed to be in control of, he'd be taken advantage of at every turn by employees, guests, and people he believed were professionals. Allegation 2, prohibiting employees from looking at or speaking with any of Mr. Kelly's female guests. Although my notes don't reflect that Mr. Kelly was asked specifically about this, he acknowledged that he didn't want his employees invading his family life or hitting on his wife or girlfriends. His brother Bruce described a change in Andrea's behavior after the marriage. And then this is Bruce. I don't know what to say about him and his wife. He had gotten to the point where he wouldn't even want her to talk to us. And we used to tour together when she was just his dancer. We always talked and, laughed and this and that. But when she became Mrs. Kelly, we would be saying hi to her and she wouldn't say nothing to us, nothing. Childhood friend Larry Hood also observed that Mr. Kelly didn't want men speaking to his wife or girlfriends, which he attributed to Mr. Kelly's insecurity. Allegation number 3. Prohibiting female assistants and employees from speaking with his male assistants in front of his female guests and girlfriends. Mr. Kelly did not directly address this allegation in our interview and appeared not to understand what could have led to anyone perceiving this. Allegation number 4. So basically he's saying that's a lie. Like he don't even know where that came from, that he's not, that they were allowed to speak to male assistants. And child, I hope we get to the part about the looking at the wall, turning their back and looking at the wall in the elevator, because I want to hear what he got to say about that. So allegation number 4, withholding a portion of an employee's salary as a fine if they did not meet Mr. Kelly's expectations. Mr. Kelly reported that he learned to fine people from basketball, as that is a technique used by coaches with whom he had more experience than employers, having only worked at a traditional job for 1 month during grammar school, cleaning at a popcorn shop. He said he fined people he should have fired. He gave as an example a woman named Diana who told him she paid $300 for a coat that cost her $150. She kept $150 of the cash he'd given her for herself. Suspecting this, he planted $100 where she found it, and she took it. She lied to him about the cost of the coat, claiming she didn't have a receipt, but he went to the store to check the price. Diana left for 2 years, then came back, told the truth, and he gave her a second chance. Just as he fined people for criminal or dishonest behavior, he would bonus those who did well, for example, giving a $500 tip to a runner who brought him chicken pot pie and served it on a tray with a fork. Bruce Kelly reported that when working on tour, his brother fined him $100 if he found him smoking marijuana in his room. Dang, Bruce. So, I'm not going to read the notes because basically you guys know it's just the citations of who said what, and I'm pretty much telling you who said what as I'm reading this. So Bruce done got fined $100 for smoking weed, y'all. So then Larry Hood said some things that he has done to people, like as far as his employees, he's done it because he doesn't know any better. Rob has never worked a job. All he's known to do is his music. So he don't really know how the workforce go. Like, you have people working for him all types of hours. He don't know that. He ain't never really worked, or been in the workforce. Okay, so I guess he didn't know about, he probably was paying these people so much money that they couldn't even complain about overtime. And I think, didn't they sue him? One of the guys talked about how they sued him for the overtime pay. So like he didn't know that, the people work more than 8 hours, you got to give them time and a half. And then if they work more than so many other hours or so many days in a row, you got to give them double time. And if they work on the holidays, that's double time. So he didn't know any of that. But you would think that he would have had a business manager or somebody over his employees. Like he shouldn't have been HR. Right, he can't be the boss and HR. And he should have had a human resource person on staff that dealt with the employees. So allegation number 5, requiring some employees to provide Mr. Kelly with a letter falsely confessing to bad behavior. Mr. Kelly denied ever requiring employees to write a letter falsely confessing to anything, but he did get written statements from people who stole from him as a condition of continuing employment. For example, a stylist nicknamed Cash, not Cash stealing from him too. Like everybody was stealing. So Cash bought him shirts she said cost $300, but really cost $99. He investigated and found she charged him $10,000 for $3,000 of jewelry, even as he paid her $5,000 per week. Lord have mercy. When he confronted her with her deceptive behavior, she cried. He asked for his money back, said he'd find her, and wanted her to write a statement and take Junebug, George Kelly, with him when she shopped for him in the future. He said he got written statements from both male and female employees who stole from him and tried to scam him. Now, Cash ought to be ashamed of herself. So, allegation number 6, expecting employees to ensure that Mr. Kelly's female guests and girlfriends abided by his rules. He acknowledged having created several rules that he expected people to follow. For parties with alcohol, he required employees to make copies of IDs to limit entry to those 21 and over. Anyone over 21, such as Joy Savage, was limited to the VIP tent. Because his studio was located at his home after he had children, he had rules to maintain order and appropriate boundaries, such as not allowing other guests to interrupt Michael Jordan when he was playing pool, or Diana Ross, Jay-Z, Lionel Richie, or other celebrities when they were working in the studio. Child, I know them folks whose names is listed here are going to be like, oh, wait a minute, hold on. Because I'm just sitting here shocked that Miss Diana Ross was up at the mansion, child. Go ahead on. Go off, her and Lionel Richie. Anyway, allegation number 7. Requiring guests to receive permission from Mr. Kelly before eating or going to the bathroom. He denied that anyone ever needed permission to eat or use the washroom. His guests ordered Uber Eats constantly, and the studio had plenty of bathrooms. The only thing that could have been so misconstrued stemmed from a problem that emerged when people were traveling on 5 tour buses and stopping at truck stops. People sometimes shopped at the truck stop and got left at stops, requiring the bus to return to pick them up. When this became problematic, he made a rule that the lead bus driver must check that all passengers were present before leaving. Sometimes when they were behind schedule, he asked that nobody get off the bus when they stopped to refuel. And then somebody's name is redacted, and it says once got off without telling anyone and was left behind, so he told her not to get off without telling Diana or him. Sound like the damn Ariel, don't it? And let's see. So some of that information that they got on that previous page came from the pre-sentence investigation report by the U.S. Probation Office. So I guess that was some of the stuff that was in the testimony. And that's how they derived at the questions that they decided to ask him. So let's see. Allegation number 8, requiring female guests to wear baggy clothing unless accompanying Mr. Kelly to an event or unless otherwise instructed by him. Mr. Kelly said that men attending shows were so disrespectful to my girls when, and they had that in quotations, when they were in the front row dressed up, looking great, that he got off the stage to protect them more than once. He suggested the women dress down to avoid this, which they did, relieving him of the problem. Allegation number 9, prohibiting guests from looking at other men and instructing them to keep their heads down. He said the attractive women he had around him told him that his homies were always hitting on them, so he suggested techniques they could use to cut off such sexual harassment and prevent disrespect, including dressing down or not engaging with them. Allegation 10, requiring guests to address Mr. Kelly as daddy. Mr. Kelly said it's a hood thing, a culture thing. All girls call their man daddy. Now, not all, Mr. Kelly, because the only person I ever called daddy was my own daddy. But we know that it is popular. Just look at Monique. She called her man daddy all the time. So women who called him daddy during sex will continue to call him daddy in front of others to establish their position. New women would hear others call him daddy, so the name stuck. When women called him daddy, it made him feel they really loved him. Aw, he felt good about it, but other names were fine too. It would be a turnoff to make a woman call him daddy, so he didn't instruct women to call him daddy, as that would be cheating. Even fans he never met call him daddy. All right now. And other fans call him the king of R&B, but he didn't promote or require either nickname. And then we know this Azriel ass, even though it's redacted. So Azriel called him Bear or Papa Bear. Males called him Big Bro. At MDC Brooklyn, other inmates call him Pops or Uncle Rob or Unc. Aww. So allegation number 11, obtaining sensitive information about sexual partners and retaining control over these sexual partners. Mr. Kelly said he'd broken up with lots of women and never needed sensitive information. Allegation number 12, creating embarrassing and degrading videos of sexual partners. Mr. Kelly acknowledged creating sex tapes and said he'd done so for 2 reasons. First, it's a turn on, and I like to look at it. Second, he didn't want anyone to be able to say he made them do it or rape them. This idea occurred to him when he began hearing rumors accusing him of quote-unquote making Andrea sign a prenup or brainwashing her. He said he lost custody of his children because of her lies. Likewise, a hair braider who filleted him, I guess gave him head, repeatedly for years accused him of forcing her to do this, but when caught in a lie about this, the accusation went away. He used videotapes. So, child, I wonder if that's Lanita Carter, who in the Cook County case. So he said Lanita was giving him head for a long time, and then we know she did the poetry piece about giving head and how much she loved it. So, child. So he used videotape to prove everything was consensual and everyone was of age. Mr. Kelly said that blank somebody was into all the kinky stuff and introduced him to scat sex. After a scat session that was shown in court, he and Lord Jesus, is he talking about Haley here? Is this Haley? After a scat section, what is scat sex? I need to go and let me Google what scat sex is, because y'all know I don't know nothing about all this stuff that y'all be into. Okay, let's see. Well, they got a whole. What is scat? What is this? Ew. Oh, eating the boo-boo. Okay, nasty, gross. So eating boo-boo. Okay, so was Haley the one? Yeah, Haley was the one child that was in the video doing that. So he and Haley had sex and went to Starbucks together. Sometimes she spanked him. He mentioned a video in which she wore a nun outfit and he wore a priest outfit. Okay, child, they were doing some freaky. So Mr. Kelly said that Haley could leave whenever she wanted to, and she did leave several times. And then there's a whole sentence that's redacted. And he said, which he said she did. She admitted that she tested Mr. Kelly by asking him to invite nephew. And who did we determine nephew was? Nephew Alex. I think that came out that the Alex guy was nephew, to join them for sex. God, this is just scandalous. And my daughter walking through here like, Mama, what is you reading? So allegation number 13. Isolating female guests from their friends and family. Mr. Kelly said the women isolated their families because of the family's antics, such as putting out falsehoods about their daughter being a sex slave. Mr. Kelly couldn't even make some of the women go home. One example he gave of parents alienating their daughter involved a woman named whom he said, so it's redacted, whom he said fell in love with him, and then the next 3 sentences are redacted. When he met her, she had an ID indicating she was 18, and while Mr. Kelly was with, this Azriel child, was with Azriel in a hotel room, her mother texted her with instructions on how to seduce him. while the parents were in the hotel lobby pretending to look for their daughter. The parents called the police, then lied to the police about her age. When the police arrived at the hotel room, Ariel showed them an ID saying she was 18. And the police spoke by phone to her parents, who confirmed she was 18. When her mother pretended she was concerned because Ariel wasn't answering her phone, Ariel said, "You're the one who told me to turn the phone off because you're with a celebrity." Ariel later admitted she'd been 17 and that her mother had been sending texts that she'd be at the hotel. Mr. Kelly sent her home the next day. The parents, who had also lied to Mr. Kelly about their daughter's age, tried to get him to approve the marketing of a dildo modeled on his penis and to use her father's $3,000 lights for shows instead of the $2 million lights he was using. He said there is a 40-minute recording of Ariel telling her father that it was the parents who lied to the police about her age, but the court wouldn't allow the defense to introduce the evidence. Another example involved Joy Savage's parents, whom he said lied to her during the COVID pandemic to try to get her to come home, telling her that her grandmother was dying. When Joy's grandmother did die, she wasn't told by her family, but he learned of it from his lawyer and told Joy during a visit. The press then reported falsely that Mr. Kelly made Joy visit him instead of going to her grandmother's funeral, but Joy knew the truth. And that was in the pre-sentencing investigation report also. So allegation number 14, making female guests dependent on Mr. Kelly for their financial well-being. With respect to this claim, Mr. Kelly said that the women lived with him and he supported them, paying for flights, rent, Uber, meals, gifts, shopping, and more. Gregory Preston, who drove and provided security for Mr. Kelly throughout his career, said he knew all the girls who traveled, and then they keep putting girls in parentheses, who traveled with Mr. Kelly. They all knew me as Uncle Greg. I never had no issue with them. They all spoke when they got the chance. They all called me Uncle Greg with a big smile on their face. Looking nice, like I said. They were well dressed, makeup on, expensive shoes, nails polished, mink coats. Not unexpectedly, those who knew Mr. Kelly best spoke in his defense. Some had first-hand observations related to the allegations that may not have been represented in the trial record. So Bruce Kelly said, "I know for a fact that a lot of these women had been lying. You know, I worked for Robert. I worked for him since 1990 on and off until 2015. Now, me and my brother's relationship has been perfect. We go through things, has never been perfect. We go through things like families, just like anybody else, you know, but I do know that people had taken advantage of him. They went through a lot of money and I'm watching it unfold. I'm watching these things unfold, you know, but basically what they say he did, you know, is actually crazy. Robert's never kidnapped anybody or held anybody against their will. The doors have been open for anybody to leave at any time. So how in the world can he be found guilty of kidnapping? You see these girls outside smiling and laughing that nobody kidnapped me. I used to make travel arrangements for different girls and females and stuff. Each had to go to the airport with ID to get their tickets. They had to be of age. When I used to call girls at his parties, they used to do NDAs, and we would take their driver's license or state IDs, make photos and copies of them and attach them and make sure they were of age. You know, and I mean, I'm watching these different parents. I'm there when, you know, they were present. I'm there when they called the police in Orlando, and the girl says, she's 19. The parents say she's 19, you know. What is that? What are you doing? Now you're saying she's underage. So Bruce was there when he met Azrael, I guess. They had different plans. Now I'm not stuttering, y'all. This Bruce stuttering in this document. So don't be thinking I'm over here drinking as I'm bringing this presentation to y'all. So what I see on social media and what I see what's going on in court are two different things. They're totally two different things. You can clearly see the things, some of these parents had a I was reading the notes at the bottom, interview of Gregory Preston, and then the pre-sentence investigation. A big and brighter idea, and now that is not going on. They want to see him put away. And then Carrie Kelly, who had been on 4 or 5 tours with his brother from 1990 to 1996, said, I believe that he just rolled with the flow. Does she like me? I like her. We see where this go. I don't think he really was in tune with these women, because I believe that he knew that they were there for the wrong reasons. I mean, is you gonna give your all to something you don't feel is lucrative? And that's what I think happened, because even on his first album, he said, when I was broke with nobody paying attention to me, and when I got big, now all the girls that surrounded me. So he was able to recognize that. They surrounding him because he was the prize. They wanted their lives to be changed. They wanted to live lavishly. They were there for the wrong reasons. Angela Belton said, he was not a leader of a cult. I know unequivocally that he was not forcing any woman to live with him against their will, because I've been around those women. I've been around those young women. Right. I've seen them. I've seen them laugh and talk, and I've seen them eat, and I've been on trips, with him to concerts where he takes them shopping and he sends their mothers. He has sent mothers gifts and money and things of that nature. So I think a lot of it has to do with women's scorn. I think a lot of it has to do with him making promises that he didn't keep. Because I have been around him. I have traveled with him. I've been on several trips. He has sent for me to come to several places with him. And these young girls would be, I wish they would stop using that damn term, young girls, they were a part of his, not entourage, but they were around and they were there. They seemed happy that I think she meant that they were well taken care of, but it said we well taken care of. So childhood friend Robert Bradley said that the original crew, who had known Mr. Kelly since childhood, called themselves the No Men, as they were the ones to warn Mr. Kelly if they saw anything getting out of pocket. But he was excluded from the entourage after a hair braider, intent on extorting money from Mr. Kelly, studied who was closest to him and falsely told him that Mr. Bradley had told her how to get money from him, soon thereafter accusing Mr. Kelly of having forced her to have oral sex with him. Child, Anita Carter, girl, we knew you wasn't right. We knew you wasn't right when Kim Fox brought you up in that indictment, girl, and we saw that video of you, and we found out you had all them kids. Yes, girl, and can't keep a man, girl. Robert done told it, Lanita. Got that man fired for no reason. Anyway, the behaviors that Mr. Kelly admitted during our interviews would not constitute the pattern of behavior known as coercive control, even though some of them would be appropriately characterized as controlling. Psychiatric diagnosis. So Mr. Kelly has been falsely characterized as a pedophile in countless online stories. No credible evidence supports this claim. I am unaware of any charges having been filed against Mr. Kelly alleging sexual misconduct toward prepubescent children, and nothing uncovered in our examination of Mr. Kelly suggests that he has ever experienced any attraction toward prepubescent tongue twister, children or engaged in any grooming behaviors towards that age group, much less these were a preferred, exclusive, or enduring source of sexual arousal as would be required before one could entertain a diagnosis of such a disorder. An attraction to adolescents with fully developed secondary characteristics is neither biologically nor psychologically abnormal, as evidenced by the variable social and legal norms regarding age of lawful marriage and age of consent throughout the world and throughout history. Obviously, sexual contact with anyone known to be younger than the age of consent is prohibited by law, and some of the jury verdicts in the instant trial indicate that the jury believed this to be true of Mr. Kelly. This is not grounds for psychiatric diagnosis. I also considered whether a diagnosis of sexual sadism or sexual sadism disorder might be warranted in light of some evidence of spanking, scripting, and apparently humiliating and demeaning behaviors in the video pornography review. Because the videos do not reveal who had requested or been aroused by these behaviors, and in the absence of evidence that these behaviors were his preferred, exclusive, or enduring fantasies, desires, or activities, I do not find that the available evidence would support this diagnosis. All right, sir, because he told y'all that was Haley bringing all that kinky mess to him. So I concur with Dr. Sorrentino and Dr. Martell that the appropriate diagnosis of Mr. Kelly, based on all the information currently available, are learning disability, social anxiety disorder in remission, panic disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, most recently from the assault while in custody, but also with at least intrusion and avoidance symptoms following sexual abuse in childhood and after witnessing Lulu's drowning, and hypersexuality. And when they're talking about the assault while in custody, that's when that crazy man attacked him, where the guard allowed that man to attack him at the MCC in Chicago. So the superstar effect. Let's see. The advent of television, the proliferation of cable channels, the popularity of the internet, and the operation of social media have exponentially increased the number of people with some claim to celebrity status. But even before any of these was invented, a curious phenomenon had been observed by Richard von Krafft-Ebing, the 19th century forensic psychiatrist, best remembered for having identified and named many of the sexual deviations recognized today. And before I read that, I'm going to go back up to the notes from the previous page. So they did a Google search of the words R. Kelly pedophile, and it produced 1,120,000 results on 5/3/2020. I'm sorry, 5/30/2022. I'm so shocked. Over 1 million results came back. Just done ruined this man's reputation, child, behind some BS. And then they talk about the mitigation report by the Renee lady. Okay, so continuing, the successful author, musician, or vocal artist, the circus rider, the athlete, and even the criminal often fascinate the young miss as well as the mature woman. At any rate, women rave over them and inundate them with love letters. Singers of renown easily touch women's hearts. That don't make no sense. They are overwhelmed with love letters and offers of marriage. Tenors have a decided advantage. Yes, because we love a man with a deep, sexy voice. So Frank Sinatra, Elvis Presley, and other superstars of the modern era share with Mr. Kelly the efforts of countless women to gain access and intimacy. While studying celebrity stalking with the support of the National Institute of Justice in the early and mid 1980s, I have occasion to observe firsthand the ceaseless maneuverings within performance venues as those in attendance vied for proximity to the performer before, during, and after the performance. I observed that physical proximity to celebrity is a cherished treasure that is brokered for personal gain by not only the entire personal entourage, but even the drivers, guards, ushers, waiters, bouncers, stagehands, personal assistants, managers, and promoters whose positions provide them this currency. Even the illusion of access has provided a one-night stand to many who appear to control access to celebrities. Okay, as Bruce Kelly described it, Robert had become a megastar, and Robert had no reason to have, to need anybody to help him get girls. Girls were constantly flocking to him. They wanted him, They came after him. Parents came after him wanting their girls to get with him. Oh my God, you should have heard actually this mom telling her what to do, what not to do, how to do this and how to be sexy and all sorts of stuff. And they knew that the girl was underage. It should be a crime for them to have done that, what they've done. Now, child, I'm going to need y'all to control this damn verbiage, because you could have finished that sentence off by saying that when we found that, I told him leave that girl alone, and then he sent that girl alone about her business, because y'all kind of playing into the prosecution's story that they telling them. So Keith Calvert said, everybody wants to be close to him because he's R. Kelly, the king of R&B type of thing. Everybody wants to be close to him. So when people want to be close to you, they figure out what you like. So if you like girls, they're going to bring girls. If you like drugs, they're going to bring drugs. If you like basketball, they're going to play basketball with you. They do anything that they can do to become friends and to become close to you. And I believe that Robert had a loving heart, so he was not going to let people. So he was going to let people around that wanted to be around. And so on the previous page, the Von Kraft Urban Guy, Psychopathia Sexualis, with a special reference to the child. Okay, that's some book, child, beyond my skill set. And then an interview with Bruce Kelly. So Larry Hood, who had been on the road with Mr. Kelly, said, Rob didn't go out searching for no women. He knows women he knows women be lined up trying to get him. You know what you call them, groupies or whatever. They would be in line to get with him, and once they broke the barrier to get with him and to party with him or whatever, everybody wanted to be the main one. They want, every lady he came in contact with wanted to be the main one. Deborah Harris thought Robert had been left vulnerable by the death of his mother. There was no trust and guidance, and he lost a lot when that happened. It was, and at such a young time, Rob made it in his early 20s, and when stardom hit and he kind of, didn't have anyone. I want to say somebody to guide him in a proper way, with nothing to gain, with nothing to benefit from this, but just, we want to see you do well. And that was kind of gone for him when he lost his mom. That was a really difficult process for him. It was very painful. He couldn't, get through a lot of situations, be crying and just broken down. That really did something to him. I think it left him real vulnerable at that point. And sometimes when you're vulnerable, a lot of things, people start attacking you. People saw ways of, being able to get into his life a little bit more, and him not having that foundation of not being able to read or write and do the things of that nature to understand what was going on really with his career. I think a lot of times, I think a lot of people began to infiltrate through his life. during that time, and she was kind of like his shield. His shield and his protection is gone now. Miss Kelly would not have allowed certain things to certain people to be or try to get on him now, because certain people looked at him like a dollar sign now. And Rob never wanted people to look at him like that. He had a big heart and wanted people to like Robert, love Robert, not the R. Kelly image. So Ms. Harris also said everybody was always jockeying for position. They want to sit next to him. They all wanted something. No one. It was hard to tell who was genuine and who wasn't. And it kept him in it keeps him in a battle situation, because you want to see the good in everybody, because that's what he want to do. Mr. Kelly's anxiety, hypersexuality, belief that women loved him, and trust in others made it difficult for him to consistently rebuff the advances of so many women. Mr. Kelly managed his anxiety through sex and was surrounded by people who did not recognize the behavior as problematic as long as he met their needs and kept generating music and revenue. Positive character traits. Janet Edmonds, who has known him since childhood, described Mr. Kelly as a great father, said he loves his kids and his kids love him, and said that despite treating his family as sacred and trying to keep his family life separate from his studio and basketball, he invited close friends to parties and barbecues and introduced his wife Andrea to everyone. Miss Edmonds said, "This man is so forgiving that you can do something to him and the next moment he will forgive you." As an example, she provided this account. He had a friend that pretty much did some injustice, did some things to him to get money. He basically, played game to get some money out of him. And so everyone was upset because he knew for sure that he had the particular thing the guy did. He knew sure that he did this particular thing. The guy did this thing to him because his inability to read and to write certain things. A lot of people will try to take advantage of him. Let's say like that, but he will forgive them. He know they did it. He know that they did him wrong, but he will forgive them and let them back in with open arms. And we know God says to forgive, but we never understood his magnitude of forgiving people that have really wronged him. Miss Edmonds described Mr. Kelly as having compassion and said, people wanted people to know what he would do for other people. Lord, I don't know. He never wanted it publicized. He would just do things. He will fill his bus up with brand new gym shoes, brand new clothing, apparel, like basketball kid kind of stuff. He would go and he would just give it out, never boasting. He didn't want the news to know about it. He didn't do it for the fame or, to say, okay, I did this, and I know I need you to take my picture. He did it very quietly. Miss Edmonds recalled that when his music teacher, Miss McLean, had to make a large payment on her house to avoid eviction, Mr. Kelly gave her the money. Robert Bradley, a friend from childhood, said Mr. Kelly was always that loving, caring person. Gregory Preston described Mr. Kelly as having a good and sharing heart, very caring and very sweet, someone who would have him pull over when driving to give money to a homeless man on the road, and as a good father who loves his kids and showered them with gifts. And he described Mr. Kelly's relationship with Andrea. It was beautiful from what I could see. Every time I was around, seemed like they were having fun, laughing, joking, and kissing. Helicopters flying over the house, dropping off thousands of roses. He showered her with gifts, cars, money, furs. When I was around them, it was like the perfect couple. Robert Kelly reported that he bought a house for his estranged sister, Teresa Sego. Oh, they don't put Teresa's name out there. Who he believed may still live in the house he bought her. Angela Belton reported that Mr. Kelly had been in the process of buying a house for his mother when she died, and he bought the house for Teresa and her husband Louis instead. Deborah Harris said Robert had been there for her when she had an autistic child and became depressed. After the diagnosis, he was there to talk to and helping out. I wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't for one of him. If it wasn't for him, she also added, his heart has been so good. He's forgiving people that have wronged him. Rob would be outside and has done so much for people that you don't even hear about. I remember was at Grant Park. A young boy was selling his candy. He had a box of candy, and he came up to us and said, "You want to buy some candy?" And Rob said, "How much if I get all of it?" And he was like, "I'll be right back." He ran and got his mother, came back. And, Rob, bought all up from him. And a lot of times people didn't see that side of him. So I guess he bought all the candy. Rob wanted to go back to seeing the good in people. He actually believed people. So many people benefited, was around for the generosity of him because it was generosity. I remember he closed down the mall for Andrea to go shopping. The kids have everything they could possibly want. Trips, Disney World, Disneyland, those things. He did those and juggled those things. Because of his generosity, and I mean generosity, people took advantage of that. They really did. And then Keith Calvert said, one thing about Robert that a lot of people don't know, he has a heart of gold, and he holds no grudges. And with that being said, a lot of times he just somewhere in his mind he forgets that people did to him what people did to him, and he finds a way to still love them and be there for them. His heart is pure with love, and I think he gave out so much forgiveness. Janet Edmonds described Mr. Kelly as such a nice man that all ages of women wanted to be involved with him. They loved him because he was kind, so forgiving, so honest. So this person that they portray in the media, oh my God, is nothing like the person that he is. Although he did not ask Mr. Kelly whether he was remorseful about the offenses of which he has been convicted, he volunteered several statements taking responsibility for certain elements of his past misconduct. Mr. Kelly admitted that he'd been a player and became controlling after seeing how many people exploited and took advantage of him, but he did not admit to RICO violations, kidnapping, or bribery. He acknowledged that prior to his prosecution in 2008, he didn't check IDs 100% of the time, but he said that since then he'd been strict about it. Prior to his arrest, Mr. Kelly had released a 19-minute song titled I Admit, and the lyrics to this song were consistent with what he told us in the interview, including admissions to lying to women and having sex with fans, a friend's partner, and a girlfriend's best friend. Child. He believes his shows should have been adults only. He was raised in the Baptist faith. His mother went to church every Sunday, and the children had to go too, like it or not. He said that he always believed in God, loved God, felt his gift came from God, and felt God. For 1 year of his adult life, he became celibate with the help of a Baptist pastor and others who regularly prayed for him. Mr. Kelly denied any drug use other than smoking marijuana fewer than 10 times in his entire life. Despite his childhood exposure to alcohol and drug abuse, he never became a daily drinker and was never told he was drinking too much. He recalled that he and his mother were both afraid to fly, and for his first overseas tour requiring flying, he and his mother each had Hennessy cognac on the plane, and that became his drink of choice for celebrations such as award ceremonies and birthday parties. Two supportive adult relationships identified by Mr. Kelly are his mother, Joanne Kelly, until her death in 1993, and his music teacher and pastor, Lena McLean, and their support fostered his music career and may have mitigated the adverse effects of his adversities. I'm sorry. He dedicated his autobiography, Solar Coaster, to these two women. Yours sincerely, Park Dietz, Emma D., clinical professor of psychiatry and biobehavioral sciences, David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA, diplomat, American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology. So there, y'all heard it from the man himself. All these rumors going around, people saying this and people saying that. So you have heard it in Mr. Kelly's words and in the words of people that know him personally. Some of this stuff that was going on. So I am going to end this here. And there's another document that I am going to read that's like 23 pages. And then I am going to read some of the character letters that they got, and those are 13 pages long, so it'll probably be around the same length as this video. So go ahead, leave your comments below, rate the video, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And until the next time, I shall talk to you guys later. Bye bye.